Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Southside Stories, where we talk to London-based entrepreneurs, leaders, and founders. And usual reminder, hit that notification bell, subscribe. We've got lots of great content still to come in the current series. And I'm joined today by Ben Adams, who's an architect. Hi, Ben.
Hello. Hello.
And I often think, if I had another career, if I had another chance at a career, and maybe I think my maths might have needed to be a bit better, but I'd love to have been an architect. I'm fascinated by architecture and architectural photography. So we're going to talk all about the world of architecture from a aesthetic and a design and a business perspective in the next 40 minutes or so. But Ben, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about you and your career journey, where you're based.
I'm Ben Adams. We have an office in Southwark, on Southwark Street, so just behind Tate Modern for those in the area. And I set up in business 22 years ago, 2003. And before that, I worked for a sort of then medium-sized architects practice. Starting the business is something I'd always wanted to do. I think partly because I'm a bad employee, I was ambitious and keen, and I don't know. I just wanted to know how things worked at a business level, as well as designing buildings and doing what architects do. And I was less interested, I suppose, in job security and career path and that world. That didn't motivate me as much as trying something and seeing if it worked. So yeah, back in 2003, we pulled the trigger and opened the doors.
Great stuff. And a lot of architects seem to have chosen that vocation quite early on. Was that the case with you? Had you wanted to be when you were, a teenager? Had you always wanted to be an architect?
No, not at all. I think I was always interested in design, although I probably wouldn't have called it that as a teenager. I like making things. I always used to make things when I was a kid and growing up. But we don't study school, most of us anyway, we don't study architecture at school, most of us anyway. It's a degree level kind of subject. So it's a slightly odd one to get into. And as a school child, you're advised on careers. And they said to me, well, maybe a philosopher. And I didn't like the sound of that. Maybe an architect, or maybe advertising, I think was the other thing that came up. I don't know, architecture stood out from that mix for me as something that I just wanted to know more about. But it's a real leap of faith, I think, when you're studying for A-levels and looking around at the world. Architecture is not one it's not that clear what it means.
When you went, after you graduated and you really got into the profession, was it what you thought it might be, or was that a whole new world of discovery?
Quite the opposite. I graduated into a recession, and my first job, I was self-employed, funnily enough, so I was working for myself for an English-American architect who's born in the UK and worked in New England in the States for a long time, and he designed and built houses himself. So I was fascinated by that, the idea of designing something and then making it. He had a big workshop, and we'd go and put windows together and bits of furniture and then go and install them in somebody's house. So I didn't know at the time, but that was great training for me to actually have to go and build things and learn what it means if it's raining, or if a delivery's late, or if things go wrong in a practical sense. You have to kind of deal with it, as a builder. But as an architect, you don't really. You just draw what you want to see, and then you go and see it be built. So I think I lucked out there. It was unexpected to have that kind of role, but having spoken to hundreds of people since, it's quite unusual, and I think it suited me, but I think it did me some good as well to get that practical experience in that way.
Great, interesting start there. So let's move on to your practice then. So it's called Ben Adams Architects, but do you have a team around you, or are you the sole principal? What's the company look like?
5 directors, and there's about 35 of us in London, and then between 5 and 10 people in LA. and we grow and we shrink over time. We're driven by the scale of projects and the economic cycle and so on that influences architects in quite a direct way. But we all work in one studio in Southwark, and we've been there for over 10 years now, and it's nice. It's proved to be a great location. We didn't really know at the time, but it's close to our clients are generally in the City of London or the West End. Both you can get there in 20 minutes. And there's been a huge amount of construction and reconstruction in Southwark since we've been there. So that's been just exciting to be in the middle of that as a designer. Again, it's relatively unusual to see so much change just going on around you when you look out the window, and it's encouraging for architects to see that happening. It's fun.
It is. I live in Southwark, and yes, God, it's changed. It's changed so much, hasn't it? And when I walk around now, we're going to talk about some of this in a second. But yes, when I walk around now, there's a lot of interesting refurb, new build. The Shard, of course, is a massive statement right in the middle of Southwark. What sort of where do you focus? Where does the practice focus? Is there a focus, or are you pretty broad?
We're reasonably broad, but we do 5 things. So we design office buildings, workplace, which is slightly different. It's based for a company and how they work. It tends to be larger businesses. Hotels, residential buildings, which might be somebody's house or it might be an apartment building. And then urban design and master planning, which it tends to be the really quite big projects that go on for 5, 10, sometimes 25 years, sort of long, slow developments. But reasonably broad. But we didn't start out that way. You sort of, you start out and find a way to design buildings, and then as you go and experience it, hopefully it kind of spreads out and you can cover more ground. That was our experience anyway.
Do you have a preference or a love of any particular one of those areas, or are you equally enamored with all of them?
Not really. I've never been that kind of architect that gets particularly interested in, I don't know, hospitals or sport buildings or cultural buildings. For me, design is a privilege, sort of all the way up and all the way down. And if you speak to architects, you'll find quite a few of us who say the same thing. That if somebody, let's say somebody's bought a new house and they're asking you about their kitchen and where should I put the hob? If you get a kick out of that question and you start sort of thinking about it, engages your creative part of your brain, then you're like me. I always find that rewarding. And it doesn't really matter if it's that sort of question about where to put the hob, or where should we put the roads in this city so we can start laying out neighborhoods. It's the same part of your brain that's doing the kind of creative thinking. It's just a different scale. And that extends to different kinds of buildings, really. It's all design, and it all requires a certain amount of creativity and logic. I think what does distinguish those different types of buildings or those different sectors is they just have different rules and regulations. There's some language that goes along with them, that you have to kind of learn that language in order to talk to people in the business confidently about it. But if anything, they've got closer together over time. You've probably noticed it. If you go into a nice office building or a nice hotel or a nice apartment building, the first space that you go into, sometimes you can't really tell the difference, because they all tend to have a reception and somebody to help you and some sofas and some art on the walls. And there's some convergence there in those kinds of spaces, which I think is a good thing. It means that it's more about design and less about something really bespoke and specific to that particular use. So yeah, we like that. We like designing things in short. That was a long-winded answer.
No, that's great. Well, let's bring it to life a little bit, and maybe a couple of examples, perhaps from the kind of 5 areas. Maybe on the office side, no, of course, London is. We're going to talk about some new builders in a second, but I'm thinking here of the obviously there's the fabric of London, listed buildings. There's a lot of kind of great buildings, but perhaps are not kind of fit for or haven't been fit for modern usage or landlord or tenant expectations. What's maybe been a great example of a property like that where you've gone in and had to really think about an existing building, perhaps a refurb project?
Yeah, we've finished one recently called Henrywood House, which is at the top end of Regent Street as it turns into Portland Place.
Hmm.
Quite a big.
It's near the BBC, is it? Is it near the
Opposite the
broadcasting house?
BBC.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're standing outside Henrywood House, you'll see the entrance to the BBC sort of ahead of you.
Hmm. Right.
Originally built in the 1960s, there's a tower and then some lower buildings that extend quite a long way. And there were some technical issues with the building when we started working on it, in that the facade was 60 years old and covered in mosaic tiles, some of which were stone, and they were starting to unstick themselves from the building and fall onto the street. When it's 16 stories high, you can see the problem. If parts of the building are falling off by the time they reach the ground, they're dangerous. So
Yeah.
it needed fixing, but it was for a client called Derwent London, who were one of the very best clients in London, shall I say, who always look for design opportunity whenever they sort of commission a project. They think, okay, what else can we do? How can we make this better? I think what was exciting about that is we could renew the outside of the building and make it look amazing. There's a project to fix the interior. But the real win for me was at ground level. There was a tired sort of road pull-in as part of the site. There were a bit of old tarmac and some broken paving stones. And it's next to All Souls Church, which is a very famous Grade 1 listed building, blah, blah, blah. It's quite a significant moment. And you've got this really quite depressing bit of open space. And as soon as we looked at it, we thought that open space in this part of London is rare. It's really quite dense. If you walk up Regent Street or along Oxford Street, it's not blessed with places to stop and sit down and take a breather. And we thought we can make a little park here as part of this project. And that went really well. It's small things, really, providing a little bit of lighting, providing some benches and somewhere to kind of pause, providing space for buggies and wheelchairs and things so that they're not going up and down curbs or they're not sort of worrying about traffic. That goes a long way to people, and I mean the general public, sort of walking past and starting to feel an emotional connection to a building. They start thinking, "Oh, I like that building because I can go past it, or I can take a breather, or there's somewhere to sit." That makes a surprising difference.
Yeah, no, I have to. Is that one? That's a completed project, is it?
Yeah, it was finished about a year ago now.
Yeah, I have to take a walk up there. Sounds great. And then sort of new build. And as we were talking about earlier, walking around Southwark, Vauxhall areas, there's some interesting things happening. And I know you've got a couple of interesting projects happening there. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, there's one called Graphite Square, which is in Lambeth. It's sort of one street back from the river. So if you know that part of London, Nine Elms and Battersea, there's been a huge amount of
Massive
riverside development and tall building, taking advantage of the river view. And there's been quite a lot of criticism, really, of, the same kind of building again and again and again, and luxury apartments and where is space for Londoners and that sort of thing. So Graphite Square is a bit different. It was, we were briefed to take a look at the site and think, how can we make space for Londoners, sort of attainable places to live that aren't real luxury. They're not kind of super expensive. They're just sort of barely priced for what they are. And there were a number of small buildings on the site before we began, which there's always a question with existing buildings as to, can we keep them? Can we recycle them? What can we do with them? We're a little bit fortunate in that we had some issues with asbestos. We had a building that was a little bit unsafe. So it was quite an easy starting point to say that the right thing to do is to demolish these buildings. They're not contributing. And then we spent a long time really learning about the history of that part of Lambeth. Like much of Riverside, London, in Southwark, where you are, and further east and west, the Riverside has an industrial past because it was used for wharf buildings, receiving goods from the river or manufacturing. There's an old bed factory right next to Graphite Square. And a lot of manufacturing used to be done in London. So we thought, how can we learn from some of that warehouse factory aesthetic from the late 19th, early 20th century, and use some of that design, those design cues in a new building. So we've got lots of bricks. We've got big warehousey windows. We've got some profiled roofs to try and pick up on that history in a, not too obvious a way, I hope, but something that does sort of resonate a little bit with the local area, and maybe as a counterpoint to some of the stuff along the river that is a bit more glamorous and maybe a bit more shiny. We wanted to do something a bit more gritty.
Yeah, I have to say, actually, when I was looking at your website, that building immediately stood out to me because that sort of aesthetic I really like. And you can immediately see that there's a really nice, throwback or echo of, the heritage of those buildings that you've been speaking about, warehousing and so manufacturing, etc. Plus, but you've got this very clean, beautiful looking proportions and a modern building. But the windows really stood out to me because it really had kind of it's very sympathetic, I think, to the history of the area. So that's looks great. Is that one finished? Is that one?
Yeah, it's sort of going through. You'd think the building's finished in a nice, neat way, but they don't. That's almost finished. It's due to complete late summer, early autumn.
Okay, so very new.
Yeah, almost there.
Yeah, great. And then you mentioned workplace as well, and I guess this is we're now thinking a bit more kind of about interior architectural. Tell us a little bit about that. Perhaps a great example. Maybe what are some of the trends that you're seeing and maybe tenant or landlord requirements for internal kind of fit out and architectural design?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's most people I think in London will have heard of WeWork. WeWork sort of expanded very quickly and then blew up quite spectacularly with news of their founder and so on. But
yeah,
what they were trying to do was provide a place to work that you as in me and you and anyone else really, could walk through the door and start work without having to do anything else. Just turn up with a computer and plug in and go. So in my world, that's called flexible workplace. And there's a company called Fora that we've worked with for more than 10 years on 7 or 8 buildings. Most recently, one in Shoreditch called Montacute Yards. It's their headquarters. Their sort of London estate is headquartered there. It was the biggest project at the time they had done. And what was really interesting, I think, is that we started designing it before COVID, and then we were designing and building it all through the COVID epidemic. And you'll remember that at the time there was quite sort of heated debate about cities and London in particular. I lived in London at the time, and it was a ghost town. There were foxes sitting in the middle of the road on Southwark Street, in the middle of the day. And the story was that everyone's going to move out of London. No one's ever going to come back, and the city will be hollowed out. And we didn't really believe it at the time, but it was a nervous time for those workplace operators that rely on people being there every day. And then it changed as we designed the building and started building it. People realized that being at home the first time during COVID, that first lockdown, when it was it was boiling hot and sunny in April. It was really comfortable. And then by the second one, it was like, oh my God, I'm staring at the walls. My kids are still here.
Yeah.
It started to lose its appeal. And so workplace trends shifted really. They became more luxurious. They became a bit of a home from home. The tagline at the time was, the best living room you've never had. So it was trying to sort of provide really quite nice interiors that you might not want or be able to afford at home to come and work in. And that sort of domesticity has carried on really. We feel at home when we enter a building that is homely. I mean, it's not rocket science, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've I'm sure walked into buildings that do the opposite, where there's a great big white space with limestone on the floor and then a desk in one corner that's miles away, and it's quite intimidating. There's kind of security guards and there's gates everywhere.
Yeah.
And you think, how is this setting you up to go and enter a building and be in a good mood, whatever you're doing there?
Very true.
And I think the trend is really the opposite of that. It's to sort of make anybody feel like they can walk through the door, even if they're just curious, like come on in and say hi. If you've got security, like make it really discreet, hide it away. There's lots of technical ways to deal with security. You don't need a guard. And that building exemplified that, I think, and that we did a lot of kind of domestic design. We learned a lot from Shoreditch, which has always been a sort of innovative place. It's always kind of trying stuff. It's a bit edgy in a fun way. And I think what surprised our client for it, they, as I said, pre-COVID and during COVID, they expected what would come out of the sort of ashes from COVID would be lots of new businesses, lots of people starting a business and trying things because they thought that would happen. And what actually happened is that the people that took space in that building were much bigger companies of 20, 30, 50 people who they were sort of uncertain about the future coming out of COVID and say, look, we've got a business, we've got this many staff, but we don't know if we're going to be 10 times the size a few years from now or out of business. The world became very unpredictable.
Yeah.
Uncertainty was the big word. And they said, okay, because we're unsure, we'd like to rent space in Montacute Yards that can grow and shrink with us without having to worry about landlords and leases and 10-year commitments. We can commit a month at a time, and that suits us. And I think that was interesting as a designer. You sort of realize that people really value flexibility, and the whole sort of model for leasing office space or even buying a house. It's really slow and expensive to buy a house. It's really slow and expensive to move. But our needs change over time and it's not always predictable. So trying to design in some flexibility to any kind of building post-COVID became really important. It was kind of a big deal. And I think we got it right on that one because they let it really quickly and slightly surprised by that.
Well, it does look fabulous. Again, we'll put a link to your website because there's some great internal photographs of what you've done there, and it does look a great design space. It's, I guess, there's still, the airiness struck me. There's still got that aesthetic of exposed kind of service pipework, but it looked like a fabulous space to work in.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's been well received. So
yeah,
I think especially with those projects that are very designed from an interiors point of view, you never quite know how they're going to go over because so much of your response to that when you walk in is about taste and comfort. Do I feel good in here? But it has been well received. So I think we struck the balance quite well, I think, between the domestic and so on.
It's very interesting, isn't it? It's come a couple of times with businesses and with architects that I was talking to Philip Atkinson from Orbit Architects. He was very involved with some of the in the sort of late 90s, there was a move to kind of retail or industrial parks or office parks. And we were talking about Thames Valley Park, where there was Oracle and Microsoft. And there's been actually a move more to locate people in more urban areas like the central London. You can see it with Meta and Google and now Microsoft. And actually, there's still the pull of the city. There's a city, yeah, there's a hassle getting in sometimes, but the actual environment of working in London is still a big draw. And then I was just thinking about, yeah, I mean, in my working life, I was thinking of all of those really not very nice offices that I've worked in. And now as I go around and I visit businesses in the area, and especially some of the working spaces, actually Ministry, which is in Shoreditch, they've done a kind of amazing job there, because you go in there and I was like, am I going into the W Hotel or am I going into a workspace? Because it's kind of quite dark and it's a bit edgy. And then you go up the stairs and the first thing you see is this wonderful kind of coffee area, which is kind of really cool. And the offices, some of the businesses in there, yeah, no, we really chose this place. It's got a fabulous gym. It's, we want it to be, clearly there's a cost that comes with this, but we want it to be sort of a destination that people really wanted to come in and spend time in the office. Exactly the kind of things that you've described. So, yeah, some interesting examples there.
I think that's a real change. You made a point that businesses have moved back into cities, and that is true. But there's been a real war on for not so much recruitment, but retention, trying to keep your staff in your business, in your office, and happy. We all learned that we could work from home, and for a time we thought it was better. And then we started to realize it's also quite lonely and it's a bit isolating. It's not all good.
Yeah.
But for people to be in the office the whole time, they needed reasons to come back, right? They needed those things you're talking about. Is there a nice place to get coffee? Is there a table tennis table? Is there a gym? Is there somewhere I could do yoga? And for a little while, that got a bit out of hand, and you had these buildings that had hardly any desks in them because it was all full of fun stuff. But the balance has shifted a little bit now, and so it's a bit more an appropriate split. But I think the thing that interested me really is that it was just sort of saying that we like cities because they're incredibly diverse and there's something for everyone, no matter what you're interested in or what your background is. You can sort of find a home in a city. And that's true of the city as a whole, but offices were quite similar. They were all, you could go from one office to another and they kind of be the same. And we thought, well, all this diversity exists out there on the street and in the world, but in terms of workplace design, it doesn't. You've got the same chair, the same desk, the same screen. And I think it took a bit of a shake-up from the tech sector originally to say, look, if you want to lie on a couch and work on an iPad, that's fine. If you want 4 screens and it to be really dark, because that's how you work best, then that's okay too. And it's that, I mentioned flexibility. I think variety is the other thing, in that I work best when I can move around. I don't like sitting still for hours at a time. I like to do one thing for half an hour and then I'll get up and do something else in another location. My partner is the opposite. She sits down to work. She'll want to sit and look at a screen for 5-6 hours without moving at all. And if you distract her, she'll go mental. She just zones in.
Yeah.
I think as a designer, that's great. That means, okay, we don't need to sort of design for the average. We can acknowledge this breadth and try and just allow people to get comfortable, whatever that means. So yeah, it's been a bit of a shake-up in that world for the good, I think.
Yeah, agree. Let's switch to hotels briefly. We're going to talk about LA in a second, but let's switch to hotels. I'm interested because I know that you have worked twice, actually, I think, on Nobu in Shoreditch. Tell us a little bit about that and what you've seen. The difference between, I don't know, 7-8 years between projects. Some of the trends that are emerging there.
Nobu Hotel in Shoreditch, we designed 7 or 8 years ago. It was their first hotel in the UK at the time, and they chose Shoreditch as a location, which for a brand like Nobu back then was a brave choice. Um, you know, they're quite a Swish brand. They're quite luxury, and at that time, Shoreditch was not necessarily that. You know, it was more about bars and dancing and, you know, behaving badly after work. But we designed a hotel that was replacing some quite poor quality 1970s warehouses that we took down, and then inserted this kind of concrete spaceship in their place. Really good fun designing for those guys. Since then, they've opened hotels all over the place. You know, they've been expanding rapidly around the world, and they decided to move on from Shoreditch, and it was acquired by another hotel brand called Ethos. And I think the change is interesting in that Nobu are quite urbane. They're a bit LA. They're kind of flashy and quite slick, with, you know, nice sushi. That's the sort of vibe. But the luxury hotel market has sort of moved on from that a bit. It's gone a bit more beachy. It's a bit more floaty. There's a lot of yoga, and, you know, Ibiza new hotels are very kind of white and open and, you know, wind in your hair stuff. And Ethos are interesting brand in that they either have urban hotels like this one in Shoreditch, or there's another one in Milan, or they have kind of beach hotels in Mallorca, in Portugal, on the kind of surf coast. And I think they're trying to capture that thing maybe we all aspire to, which is, you know, live in a city and holiday at the beach.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
can we create hotel space that covers both ends of the scale? But it's really good fun going back into a building that you designed 7 years ago and having another go at it with a different brief for a different kind of client. It's great fun. You get to correct one or two mistakes that, you know, you made
Right.
first
Yeah.
time around. But really, it's a sort of repositioning exercise and a rebranding exercise to think, okay, this needs to be different now, and the interiors all need to change to sort of reflect that. It's a different style. And
It's interesting, isn't it, actually, that, sorry to interrupt, but I was just thinking about the brand, you know, the brand, because there it's, I guess it's not just designing, you know, a space. It is, how does this reflect the brand? And as a client, are they very, how does that work? Are they very articulate and very specific about how their brand should be represented in a physical world?
It's a great question, and I'll talk about this one specifically, but it really varies across the hotel world. So a brand like Whitbread, Premier Inn, you know, most people have been to a Premier Inn. Their brand standards are incredibly tight, and they sort of determine everything you can and can't do down to the millimeter. So as a designer, it's quite easy because it sort of says what's okay.
Right. Yeah.
A brand like Nobu, their brand standards are incredibly elastic. So they give you loads of freedom as a designer to say, well, we want it to be about the place. We like Shoreditch. We don't want to kind of drop in Malibu in California into Shoreditch. That's not what we do. This needs to be a different kind of building, and it all up. And they sort of would argue that the branding for them is about food and their restaurant. That kind of carries their name really strongly. But as a designer, it's a nightmare. It's like, okay, so it could be anything. It's completely open, which for me is much harder than having a stronger brief. And Ethos are similar. They're a bit tighter than Nobu in that they kind of know a bit more about what they want, but it's still very vibe heavy. You know, it should feel good. It should feel light. It should feel modern. All nice words, but ones that you have to sort of unpick as a designer and think, okay, what does that mean? Let's try and imagine it could be this, it could be that. So it's surprising that we've worked with a few brands over the years that we'd expect to be incredibly restrictive, and they've been really open. And then other brands that we'd expect to be open and friendly and chatty, and they've been incredibly strict. Will be like this. So I think that's that's a big part of what I do in the business is try and get to know clients and try and work out what's actually pushing them to do a project and what they want to get out of it and what their kind of pressures are. I think very often if you don't ask, they will be under a lot of pressure, but it will be hidden away. You won't ever find out what it is. And it tends to come out in a change of direction or a change in the brief or a big delay. And if that happens unexpectedly, it's quite hard to deal with. But if you've managed to sort of learn a bit more about why they're doing something and what the pressure is,
Right. Yeah.
okay, we understand that. Why don't we try this?
Yeah.
So yeah, sort of like that process.
Yeah, we could actually spend much more time talking about that. I'm fascinated by that, and I guess because how do you know if when it's finished, the vibe is going to be there? So I guess the pre-visualization, the walkthroughs, the 3D. I guess is there more focus on that stage, and have we captured this slightly esoteric sort of feeling?
Yeah, it's got
brief?
better with technology recently in that we can now model a building in its entirety and represent it as if you're there. You can build a digital twin of a building. So it's a sort of identical copy running in software, but it's not really the same. You're still looking at it on a 2D screen. You're not actually there. We can put you in VR and you can experience it that way. A lot of people feel sick doing that. So that's not what you want. You don't want to make people feel sick. So that's sometimes it's the answer, but not very often. I think the best thing we do is we build lots of mock-ups. And with a hotel, if you can imagine, hotels very often have a corridor and rooms on either side. So a mock-up for a hotel might be a pair of rooms and a section of corridor, completely finished, as if
really. Oh, right. Okay. Right.
And very often that
almost yeah. Sorry.
That will get built.
Almost like a set. Yeah.
Yeah, it is exactly a completely finished set, but not built on site. It'll be built in a different building if the building's not ready. If you do that, then you can stand there with your client and you can have a bit of a party often, and you can sort of test it out as a hotel room and you can tweak things and change them. So that's nice. When that happens and you can go to all that trouble before you build many, many copies of a hotel room, you're much more certain about how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is down to trust and whether you trust your architects, whether you trust your designers. And that is changing. That world of trust is being eroded. I think a lot of clients and people that pay for buildings want more certainty about outcome. And they kind of ask you as a designer to prove that it's going to be a good building. And they want you to try and measure how it's going to be good in advance. And there are techniques for that. Certain things you can measure, there's certain metrics you can provide. But it's hard for them. They're spending 50, 100 million pounds on something without really knowing what it's going to be like. And, they might have an architect saying, trust me, it's going to be good. I can see why they said, well, I need a bit more than that. But that is the journey, really, is sort of trusting the process a little bit and seeing how it goes. Which is, I find it exciting, but then I don't pay for buildings. So it's an interesting journey.
Yeah, no, it sounds it. Let's switch to residential briefly and LA, because I think it'll mainly focus on residential in LA. Is that right? But bit of background to opening an office in LA, and just a couple of examples there, maybe, of what you're working on.
By all means, it was complete madness. We opened an office in LA 7 years ago, and the assumption from people we talked to is that we had a big project, or we had a family connection, or there must be a reason. And the truth was that I like the weather in California, but I particularly like the kind of culture in California, which is probably not quite what you think. And that it's a mixture of sort of outdoor lifestyle that we've all seen on TV, sort of hippie, wellness, good living stuff, which again we've seen in the media. and then a kind of really pragmatic capitalism that underpins it all, that says, okay, why are we doing this? Is it going to make any money? Shall we carry on doing it? And it's not especially ruthless, but it's very pragmatic. It's always there.
Yeah.
And that interested me because we went to, you go to LA, it's a big city. It has a lot of the same pressures as a city like London. It can't spread out anymore. It's reached its natural limits in mountains that are, protected wilderness. There's an ocean on one side. It can't sprawl. So there's a metro system that's being built and getting bigger and bigger. There's a pressure to increase density, much as there is in the UK and London. And we opened an office thinking we would cover the same ground that we covered in the UK. And then in the first 2-3 years, we realized that the market there for us was really in residential buildings. They split quite neatly into apartment buildings and sort of single family houses. And they split again into affordable housing, so housing for a couple who are buying their first home, or affordable housing for veterans who are coming back from a war, all the way up to really quite luxurious housing, often up in the hills, the big house with the pool and the view. There are endless hills in LA, so you can just keep building those forever. So yeah, it took, I'd say, 3 years to establish ourselves at all in a new market, in a new city, and just to get to know people. And then since then, it's been great. Actually, it's been profitable, and we've sort of learned the city and know what we're doing over there, and we've learned. I think the thing that really surprised us about LA is that how totally indifferent they are to Europe. There's an interest in food.
Yeah.
And there's an interest in London and the UK from a sort of accent point of view. But when it comes to design and business, it is an 11-hour flight away. They're much more interested in the Pacific than they are in Europe, just because they're geographically adjacent in their minds. So we had to learn that pretty quickly. We had to think, okay, we're not coming here to teach you very much. We're coming here to listen and learn, and then we can design buildings. But I think the thing I'm most proud of was that it worked. Lots of people said it was a crazy thing to do, and it's too far away, it's too difficult. You'll never make it work. And I was quite belligerent about it and thought, no, I think we will. There is a market there, and we've met enough people who want us to do a design for them that we'll make this work, and we did. So yeah, I'm proud of that. It was a difficult thing to do. I wouldn't recommend.
No, it sounds a ballsy move, to be honest. I mean, do you like taking? How do you risk taking? I mean, what's your attitude to risk?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you've been quite adventurous in your career, because very early on you decided to go and start your own practice.
Yeah, I should explain that I'm not wealthy either. I don't come from money. So I guess I am quite, I'm quite interested in risk, and I do embrace it. I don't think I'm reckless, but I think I have a sort of restlessness about what I'm doing today and what I'm doing tomorrow. And I like things to change. So whenever things get into a pattern, and a comfortable pattern, I sort of get a little bit restless and think, okay, now what? Let's try something else. I think when that works, it's brilliant, because you do try things and you push yourself in ways that you wouldn't otherwise do, just because you sort of feel let's give that a go. That'll be fine. When it goes wrong, it's exhausting, because not everything works out, and things go sideways. And I've made my life fairly complex at times just by taking those risks and seeing things go wrong. Or COVID happens. That took everyone by surprise. I was also getting divorced at the same time. We had some ransomware hacking at work about a year later.
Yeah.
So yeah, life got very, very complicated for a time and really difficult. But for me, that that sort of struggle is worth it, because the upside of trying things and it working out is for me worth it. I do drive other people mad sometimes. Why don't we just carry on doing what we're doing? It's fine. But yeah, I need somebody around me really who provides balance and is more level and pragmatic and says, yeah, okay, we can do that, but the consequences of it are X, Y, and Z. Are you aware of that? Just to sort of.
And the team around you and your co-directors, are they?
I'm one of 5
They some of them fit that mold. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of 5 directors. There's 2 of us are male, 3 female, which in my world is unusual to be a sort of majority woman-led architects practice. And we're all from different backgrounds, number of different countries represented there. So I think it's relevant for business and maybe something you cover, but I think I was taught a little bit that when you start a business, you sort of tend to look for people who are a bit like you, who've got the sort of similar mindset, similar ambition, like they're ready to make that leap. But what you actually need is people who aren't like you, and you need people to provide a counterpoint and who get a kick out of doing the things that you're not going to do because you're not interested, and vice versa.
Yeah,
it's that sort of covering a lot of bases that is perhaps more important than 5 people who all want the same thing, all going in one direction, but maybe leading one side.
I saw something recently. He was talking about, he does crazy stuff like rowing across the ocean. And he was talking about, in a team in a very small boat where it gets quite intense. He was talking about sort of creative or constructive conflict, I think was the way he described it. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? You sometimes sort of need that, that sort of tension sometimes to really actually make sure decisions are really examined from a couple of different viewpoints, and that actually it is right overall. So it sounds like you've got that. Tell us a little bit. We're nearing the end of our time, but just some of the first off challenges running an architectural practice. I mean, this cyclical nature of it, it's very heavily tied to the property market and the cyclical nature of that. How do you manage that kind of project flow? You've got win this great project, but then how do you balance we haven't got the capacity to get to the next one, but we might have a gap in 1 or 2 years. How do you manage that whole flow?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is a challenge, I think, for architects more than other consultancies in the sort of construction world. So our workflow tends to align pretty much with the economic cycle. Looking back, 2003, we had a .com crash, and there was quite a sharp economic fallout from that for a year or two. And then 2005 onwards, things got better again. 2008-9, there was a subprime mortgage crisis in the US, and that spread over here to 2010. And then we started to come out of that. And then in the UK, 2016, we had Brexit, and then we started getting into an endless election cycle. So you can sort of see there that in that 20-odd year period, there's been 3 recessionary events, quite big ones, COVID, .com, and the subprime mortgage crisis. And then in between, there are periods of 4, 5, 6 years of growth and investment. And for a business, that's hard to manage. And what you don't want to do with your staff is build up staff during the growth period and then let them all go because there's a recession and do it again. So what do? You try and look for a mixture of projects, a mixture of sizes, a mixture of sectors, but sizes in particular. Big projects go slowly and they just take longer and they stop and start in a slower way than small projects. So if you've got a big one of those, kind of smoothing things out a little bit, and then some smaller projects filling in, you can start to put together a cash flow that is a bit more predictable.
Yeah.
I think when it's hard is when there's an event that hits everyone, like 2008, 9, 10 was like that. the kind of money markets just collapsed overnight, and merchant banks were going bust. Things that we'd never seen in our lifetimes were happening, and that doesn't affect us, the next day. But with experience, you can look at events like that and thinking that is going to have an impact on us in the next year or two. That is going to have a massive impact on what we do, because if you can't borrow money, and nobody trusts money anymore, you can't build buildings. It's impossible. And sure enough, that period of time, the phone sort of rang every day for a while with a client saying, can you just stop work on that for a moment? Yeah, we're going to pause that project. And that was tough. That was, and everyone was in the same boat. In my world, it wasn't as if we were singled out. Every architect you spoke to said, yeah, we're shedding staff, work is stopping. It's a problem. So as I said, if you can get a mixture of projects of different scales, and if you can get a mixture of work in different sectors, you'll find that, if office buildings dry up, then something else will take their place, and you can get a bit of smoothing out that way. But I think the best thing you learn with experience is really you can see it coming more clearly. If you're 30 and you've just started a business, you don't see it coming at all. It's a complete shock.
Yeah.
When you've been doing it for a while and you can sort of see what the headlines are, you can talk to people and see what they're saying, then you start to think, actually, there's going to be a problem a year or so from now, and we need to act now. So you can start to anticipate with more clarity. And I don't really know how to sort of encourage younger practices to learn that, because it does feel like an experience thing to me. But it's easier now than it used to be, because you really can think, okay, there's a problem up ahead. Let's get ahead of it.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that just comes with age, doesn't it? And living through some of these momentous events and the impact and the living it and getting through it. How do you feel now? Like, if we look into the future now, when you think about where you want to take the business and what you think in terms of what the prospects are for growth in the next couple of years, how does that look for you?
In terms of where we want to take the business, I can see a period of growth, quite significant growth coming up, and it's partly because it was hard for us a couple of years ago, and we got more organised. We did a lot of soul searching and restructuring. We did some hard yards really in getting more disciplined about what we do, and that was overdue. But the market for us has been connected with existing buildings for a long time, since we started. Remaking and reusing existing buildings has always been something we've done, and that's become really fashionable for reasons of carbon and sustainability and the circular economy.
Yeah,
repurposing buildings is bang on trend, and it's often taking a quite bad, ugly, tired building and turning it into something cool. And that's exactly what we do. So there'll be growth in that from us more than in new buildings, in a greenfield somewhere. And I'm excited about that, because I think because we've been doing it a long time and we've always done it, we really do understand it better than most people. And we don't have to lie. We don't have to exaggerate our ability. We can sit there and say, look, we've always done this. We know how this goes. We can tell you what the risks are. We can tell you how to manage those risks. We're sort of confident in that world. And it just so happens that the stars align at the moment to make that the sort of default type of project. So yeah, I think for the next 4 or 5 years, that will power some growth.
excellent, great. Well, that's a very positive way to finish that. Let's wrap. And I always ask this of everybody that's been on. 2 questions. I'm going to spring one on you, actually, which is your leadership style. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit as well, I think, in terms of the way that you perhaps selected and worked with your other 4 or 5 directors. How do you think your leadership style has changed over the last I don't know, 10, 15 years or so.
Well, I used to be a sort of benign dictator.
Yeah.
We used to say very often, it's not a democracy, top down, I'll tell you what to do and you'll do it. It doesn't encourage a great deal of loyalty, that approach.
Yeah.
But now we have a kind of led consensus, if you like. So the 5 people in a room, we have to agree. We can't make any majority decisions. So it has to be everyone or no one. And you stay in the room until you make a decision. I really like it because as it gets later and people get hungrier, they will make a decision. They will stop being argumentative after a while, whatever the position is, because it's like, we're not leaving till we've made a decision. So yeah, I think we've gone from a dictatorship to a kind of, God, it's a committee, isn't it? It's not really a committee.
Yeah.
Consensus building, a better phrase.
And that's because what's driving that is that you value, as you've got older, more experience, you value, or you see the benefit, the value of other opinions, or?
I think it's partly that. You definitely see greater value in other points of view. I think I'm experienced enough now to be able to build consensus with disparate group of people. And I think when you're younger, that's really hard, in that it's easy to form a point of view and you view sort of consensus building as persuading everyone to agree with you.
Yeah.
That's not a consensus. That's bullying, really.
Yeah.
So I think I've learned to say, well, I've formed a view on this. My gut says this. This is what I think we should do. But what do all of you think? And then be prepared to change your mind. Sometimes 180-degree change and say, I hadn't thought of it like that. What do people think of that? So I think as long as you've got good people around you who understand about what a consensus is and that decisions have to be made and aren't just argumentative, then it's a really good model. I think when it gets derailed is if you've got a small group of people who've got their own ambitions or their own little faction or their own axe to grind, and they're going to come into conflict, and they do again and again and again. You think, okay, this isn't working for that environment. You probably need a bit more of a dictator to kind of bring the axe down. Say, right, we're going to do this. So yeah, I think it is partly more experience, partly getting the right group of people to be able to work in that way, and then trusting the process and saying, this is going to be great. Let's do it.
Yeah. Great. And who's been a really positive influence on your own career?
There's a question. I think there's a good architectural one. There's an architect called Simon Alford, who I've known maybe 30 years now. He's an ex head of the RIBA. I used to work with him at a practice called HMM. And, I met him as a young architect. I worked for him for 5 years. And I think we got on very well when I was young and he was a partner in a business. And in my experience, that's quite rare to be able to make a connection with somebody who's much more senior than you and older than you. And I think his style of leadership impressed me, really. He was in a business that grew fairly quickly and frank at times as well. And I think he had a good understanding of that growth is great and growth is good fun, but nobody grows forever in a straight line. There will always be, well, people call it consolidation, but they mean shrinking. And I think handling that well is one of the great challenges, like riding the wave on the way up and then surfing it on the way down without hurting anyone and without sort of crashing onto the rocks is a real art to that. I think he's good at it.
Yeah. Great example. Well, Ben, that was really, we covered a lot of ground there, and we could have done 2 hours on this, but thank you so much for your time. There's loads of great stuff in there. I really enjoyed talking to you. And best of luck with the next phase of growth. Sounds like it's going really well. So you've got some. We're going to put a link to the website. Got some amazing examples on there, and it sounds like you've got some great projects in the pipeline. Thank you for your time.
Right. Thanks, Matt. It was a real pleasure.